Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a fascinating and incredibly practical piece of source material. We're talking about ACM, Lesson 24. If you're the kind of person who loves a structured deep dive that genuinely challenges the way you think, you're going to get a lot out of this one. And that lesson is exactly this. I do not perceive my own best interests. Okay, let's dive into this because I know it sounds a little jarring at first, right? We spend our entire lives hustling, trying to hit our goals, and basically assuming we know exactly what's good for us. But this text completely flips that assumption on its head. To break down exactly how this works, here's our quick roadmap for today. 1. The happiness illusion. 2. The barrier to learning. 3. The radical honesty exercise. 4. Uncovering contradictory goals. And 5. Your daily practice summary. Starting off with part 1, the happiness illusion. So the text introduces this premise that pretty much forces us to completely reevaluate how we make decisions. It explicitly tells us that in literally no situation that arises do you actually realize the outcome that would make you happy. I mean, really think about that for a second in the context of your own life. The idea here is that because our baseline perception of a situation is fundamentally wrong, we don't actually have a reliable guide for what to do. And if our actions are driven by that wrong perception, well, the inevitable reality is that we're not going to serve our own best interests. We just can't. If we don't correctly perceive what's going on, we won't even recognize what our true best interests are, even though they're the only thing we're actually looking for. Moving right into part 2, the barrier to learning. Now, if our perception is so off, you might be wondering, why is it so incredibly hard to just fix it? Well, the core psychological block keeping us stuck in this endless loop is our own stubborn certainty. The text points out a really simple but profound truth. If you just realize that you don't perceive your own best interests, you could actually be taught what they are. But as long as you have this rock-solid conviction that you already know what's best, you just can't learn. It's like trying to pour water into a cup that's already completely full. So the whole purpose of today's idea is to act as a step toward opening your mind, just enough so that some real learning can finally begin. Which brings us to part 3, the radical honesty exercise. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we translate that big abstract philosophy into an actual boots-on-the-ground practice. The text is super clear that this requires way more honesty than we're used to giving. Here's the breakdown. First, you start by repeating today's idea. I do not perceive my own best interests. Then, and you'll want to really mentally slow down for this part, you close your eyes and actively search your mind for any unresolved situations that are currently stressing you out. Third, you shift your focus to uncovering the specific outcomes you think you want. And finally, you wrap it up with a very specific phrase, which we'll cover in just a second. That takes us into part 4, uncovering contradictory goals. Step 3 is where the real heavy lifting happens. It requires a specific mental mapping technique to expose all those underlying demands we're making. The source material gives us this exact fill-in-the-blank template to use. As you search your mind and lock onto an unresolved problem, you name it, and then you carefully list out every single goal you want met. You literally say to yourself, in the situation involving blank, I would like blank to happen, and so on. The goal is to honestly cover as many different kinds of outcomes as you can possibly think of. But as you're filling in those blanks, you've got to push yourself a little further. Ask yourself honestly, are you making demands that don't even seem directly related to the situation? Are you demanding things that aren't even inherently part of the actual problem at all? And this brilliantly illustrates the core promise of the text, because if you do this properly, you're going to quickly realize that your mind is a total tangled web. You'll see that you're making all these totally unrelated demands, and that a lot of your goals are operating on entirely different levels and actually contradicting each other. You'll see you have zero unified outcome in mind, and because of that massive internal conflict, you have to experience disappointment with at least some of your goals, no matter how the situation actually resolves. You've essentially rigged the game against your own happiness. Finally, we have part 5, your daily practice summary. Now, recognizing this massive internal conflict isn't supposed to be a downer. It is the absolute necessary first step to breaking free from it. So, here's your exact schedule. The text explicitly says you need to undertake 5 distinct practice periods today, 5 separate times to just stop, step back, and examine your mind. Each of those 5 sessions, they only need to take about 2 minutes. The source material emphasizes that it's way more helpful to spend those 2 minutes deeply and honestly considering just a few subjects rather than rushing through a quick, cursory glance at a huge list of problems. Deep focus on a few unresolved situations is key here. And after you've mapped out all those hoped-for, entirely contradictory goals for a specific situation, you finish by saying this exact phrase: I do not perceive my own best interests in this situation. Once you say it, you let that situation go and move right on to the next one that crosses your mind until your 2 minutes are up. Which brings us right back to the main lesson for today. I do not perceive my own best interests. So, to quickly summarize, 5 times today for 2 minutes a session, use the template to expose your conflicting goals and end each reflection with that liberating realization. It leaves us with a pretty provocative question, doesn't it? If we could finally just drop our contradictory demands and admit we don't know the way, what amazing things might we finally be open to learning? Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. If you found this breakdown insightful and want more of these deep dives, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an update. Keep learning, stay open, and I'll catch you in the next one.